we expect them to move somewhere for 3 months, give up the job they were doing, not take classes so they're not getting GI Bill, and do this internship. Like, that's insane. And so we see student veterans not getting the opportunities that other students are getting because, again, the system wasn't designed for student veterans.
Welcome to the Governor's Institute podcast for military service members, veterans, and their families. This podcast is designed to help connect those who served and their families with the services and benefits they've earned. Listen to thoughtful conversations that offer insights and everyday tools to get the most out of your service, wherever you are in your career. Follow this show wherever you get your podcasts and stay connected at governorsinstitute.org or follow us on social media at GOVINST. Now let's get to the show.
Hello, and welcome to the NC Strive podcast, where we focus on empowering military members, veterans, and their families in their journey through higher education and beyond. NC Strive is a diverse consortium composed of 2-year and 4-year public and private schools, federal and state agencies, teachers, administrators, staff, and advocates. Since 2015, we've been working to increase awareness and knowledge about the increasing unique challenges that veterans and their families face as they transition from military life into an academic setting, and that's the goal of this podcast series. With veterans as our focus, we're covering a spread of topics ranging from student life to resources on campus, academic accommodations, mental health, budgeting, much more. All with the goal, though, of getting actionable intelligence, boots on the ground information and know-how out there for both military students and for the people whose job it is to help those students succeed in their educational journey. I'm your host, John Camp, and in this episode, we're going to explore the question of who exactly military students are. We're going to break down what this group looks like to the degree that we can. It is a diverse group, but there are through lines, and it's important to know what those are. That's our goal today. We're joined by Dr. Abby Kinch, Chief of Staff at Student Veterans of America, and Brad Wrenn, Program Manager for Military and Veterans Education at the UNC System Office. Both of you, thanks for joining us. Before we slide too far down this rabbit hole, I want each of you to share a bit about your story with our listeners. Both of you were student veterans. Brad, you are a student veteran. But Abby, I love the applause for our listeners. Abby's actively applauding this. Let's start with you, Abby. You enlisted right after the attacks on September 11th, the day after the attacks, I think. Tell us a bit about that if you want to then, but also your transition back to civilian life and into student life.
Sure. Thank you. So I was actually about a week or so into my sophomore year of college. I was studying math, and I was pre-med at the University of Florida. And, that Tuesday morning that we all remember, I was sort of doing what all college kids do, sleeping off a bit of a hangover. And I got a phone call from my mom telling me to turn on the TV. My roommate and I went down and watched, in sort of awe and with a bit of incredulousness in what was happening, in disbelief, and both sort of on the spot decided that, maybe we wanted to do something about it. And so we drove down actually to the recruiters. They were all in a strip mall, all 4 of them lined up. I went down to the recruiter's office that same day, but they were closed. So I went the next day and started the process to get to join. I actually, at first, I talked to a few of the branches. I wanted to do combat. I wanted to be in a combat role. I was super angry at what had just happened. But as a woman, that wasn't for me at the time in 2001. So I ended up talking to an Air Force recruiter about becoming an airborne cryptologic linguist. And, decision-making in the military being what it is, I ended up a Chinese linguist in the middle of a Middle Eastern war. So spent some time learning Chinese and, had a blast in the Air Force. When I got out, it was the same thing that you hear, that we still hear daily from current student veterans. Brad, I'm sure you feel it. You're sitting in a classroom with folks who don't look like you, don't have the experiences you do. They have their own very fascinating stories, but it's not where you came from. It's a huge culture shock. that reacculturation process is hard. And so I found a single friend eventually, but was dragged to our student veteran center by a former Marine I encountered at a Chinese tutoring session. She dragged me to the student veteran center. I met other student veterans, and I mean, the rest is history. I got involved with our chapter of Student Veterans of America while I was in grad school, went on to get a PhD, and in the summer of 2020, joined the national headquarters staff at Student Veterans of America.
It's a great story. They are lucky to have you, and thank you for that service. Brad, take it home for us. You spent 6 years in North Carolina's Air National Guard. I want you to tell us about that service, and then hone us in on this kind of question of who are military students. You walk among them, so to speak, and so I think you can kick us off, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, so I'm gonna date myself a little bit by talking about my enlistment, because I went in the mid '90s, and really higher ed has always played a role in my decisions around the military. Of course, we were not in an active war during that time when I enlisted, and so I went in primarily with the idea that this was how I was going to pay for my college, because I had no other way to do it. And it's funny you mentioned September 11th, because I remember that day very well also because I got a call that morning from my commanding officer, and he said, grab your go bags and report, because, it's happening right now, and what we've been training for is about to go down. And at that moment, to me, really, that's when the nature of my service changed, and it went from this passive thing that I'm just doing to pay for college to like, okay, this is what I'm a part of now. This is real. And so it's an interesting parallel on that date. And, after I got out of service, I did some time in the corporate world doing executive education and leadership studies and things like that. Oh, I guess I should mention too that I had a fairly unique distinction when I was in the Air Force. In that I never worked for the Air Force. I was a meteorologist, and so I always worked for the Army. So I can take a joke if I've been the only Air Force guy in a brigade of Army folks. So anyway, after I got out of service, I went back to school, and yeah, you're right, exactly what you said. You're sitting. I remember very distinctly going to college, having just gotten out and seeing all of the guys, right, walking around campus. And I was like, does nobody here own a razor? Like, what is up with this? Like, everybody is like shaggy haired and wearing flip-flops, and nobody. And it was just the first time to me that I realized, okay, there's a difference between what I've just experienced for the past 6 years and what these folks have experienced for the past 6 years. And unfortunately, at that time, there were no real veteran centers on campuses. It was primarily, your school certifying official who was buried somewhere in the registrar's office who pushed the button on your GI Bill, and that was about all the contact that you had with your school, and outside of course, SVA. And so it was definitely a difficult transition, and I think that's one of the things that, as a segue into sort of who are these students and what is that experience like? I've worked with student veterans and military students, military affiliated students for about 15 years. And overwhelmingly, that is a perception that I have gotten from them, is this sense that they have either through their own identities or through sort of the interpretation of their identities by others, have been othered, right? So there's this idea that we are not them and they are not us. And there's this schism between the military affiliated or military student and civilian student bodies. And so, I think one of the challenges is to sort of identify this group and who they are and what those unique challenges are, but then, don't continue to other them, right? Don't make these services that are, okay, this is just for military students. We've got to, we often in higher ed look at this as from a deficit perspective, right? So we have to help the vets. We have to, serve the troops. We have, because, they for some reason can't do it themselves, right?
Yeah.
But the real goal is to bridge that gap, to bridge that schism, and to create programs and systems and processes in our higher ed institutions that bring the civilian student community and the military student community together and kind of help them integrate into academia.
All right, Brad, you've already answered my next question. You're not allowed to do that anymore.
All right, sorry.
I'm actually going to direct this question then over to you, Dr. Kinch, and that is, why are we spending time on this? I just wanted to back the whole conversation up just a minute and explore why it's important to consider this question of who are military students, just at a top level for administrators and staff and teachers and students even, just to consider and understand the question of who we're talking about and the group we're talking about. I think Brad just nailed it and knocked it out of the park. But I want to hear you weigh in on that as well, the importance of understanding this question.
Sure. Well, so I think you can look at it from three lenses, right? Student veterans, and I'll take the nerd approach, Brad, that to talk about it by the numbers. Student veterans are the most diverse student group when you look at not just race and ethnicity, but in terms of thought, in terms of experience, in terms of where they're from, in terms of a host of different things. 2/3 of student veterans are first-generation college students, but over 50% have some sort of disability. Over 50% are parents. Over 50% have children. 20% are single parents. And so, when we talk about what student veterans need, Brad, to your point, that deficit model thinking is so misplaced, because veterans don't need, like the remedial math, though some may, and that's fine. What they need are access to things that help, all non-traditional students succeed in a system that was not designed for them, right? And so we've got this really diverse, highly intersectional student group who just needs different things. They're also highly successful. We did a bit of comparison, just sort of looking at a starting point for a place to recommend programs and policies for student veterans. And, we compared veterans to student athletes. We compared them to honor students. We compared them to at-risk students. We compared them across the board. And student veterans actually highly resemble international students, which, if you think about it, makes perfect sense, right? So we've got these students coming from a practice and a culture that is not what they're experiencing in higher ed. There's a language barrier. There's a different appreciation of time and, Brad, to your point, grooming standards, right? There are all of these differences, all of these cultural differences that make an impact on student veterans as they enter higher ed. That really that's what we need to be thinking about, less so the little things here and there that make us quote unquote military friendly. And then finally, veterans are the highest educated population when they're compared to, this generation of veterans, when they're compared to other subsets of the population. And they're majoring in things that we need, right? So just like international students, student veterans major in business, STEM, and healthcare related fields. And what do we need as a country, right? Degrees in business, STEM, and healthcare related fields. So we need to be looking at student veterans as, that next generation of leaders, those next generation of business owners and corporate leaders, nonprofit leaders, healthcare leaders, researchers, engineers, all of these things that the country is desperately needing. That's what student veterans are. And so I think if we sort of think about who student veterans are, if we think about them from those three lenses, we sort of drop this idea that we should focus on, waiving application fees, or although that is appreciated and nice, that's not what student veterans need. And we can talk, I think we're going to talk more about that later. And I don't want to, start answering questions you haven't asked, but it's just the reframing, right? Looking at student veterans as assets rather than deficits, just like Brad said.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as you're talking that it's really hard to help somebody if you don't know who they are and have a basic or general sense, a specific if possible, where they're coming from, what they need. If you don't know those questions, the answers to those questions, or aren't hearing somebody talk about that who's lived the experience, I don't know how you're going to put policies and programs in place that are going to benefit those people.
Yeah.
Could
Brad, I just jump on? Yeah,
I want to ask you to. Yeah, how's it look from your perch?
You really said a mouthful there, and I want to point out a pearl that you dropped on folks, and that is the fact that when we look at and we've done the research at the UNC System Office, not only with what the top demand majors are for students coming out of the military, but the top MOSs and AFSCs and other military occupations who are going to be separating out of the military within the next 5 years. Those track exactly with critical workforce needs, not only throughout the nation, but specifically in North Carolina. This is NC Strive, right? So this is a key demographic for helping us fill those critical workforce needs. And I'll tell you what, Abby, I'm going to double down on the nerd data for you. And tell you.
We're all nerds here. That's all right.
All right, good deal. I'm amongst friends.
It's a safe space.
It's a good business practice to court these students. Just to give you an example, right? Within the 17 constituent institutions of the UNC system in North Carolina, just the post 9/11 GI Bill tuition that is paid to our schools and tuition assistance that is paid to our schools directly, we're looking at over $53 million annually. That's huge. And the kicker is that that's really only a fraction, because you've got all of your military affiliated students. You've got your Chapter 35 dependent education assistance students. You've got your 1606 National Guard and Reservists. You've got old farts like me who have the Montgomery GI Bill. You've got folks who are in Veterans Readiness and Education, what used to be VOC Rehab. All of those folks receive money to go to school, but we don't account for it because it's not paid directly to the school. It's paid to the students. They get the checks directly from the VA. It still comes back to our schools. These students still buy parking passes and meal plans and pay for their tuition on deferments. So that amount of money, that $53 million, is really a super lowball number. And that's just within public four-year institutions. That's not accounting for any of the community colleges, any of the independent colleges and universities and the for-profit folks. It's a massive amount of money in guaranteed tuition backed by the U.S. government that these students are bringing into our facilities.
They're also, if I can jump on that, veterans are highly civically engaged. And so if universities would talk to them as students instead of something else, and engage them as alumni like they do other students, there's that return that students give, which, because they're so engaged, they're so civically engaged, and they remember their alma mater and they want to remain connected to where they graduated from, there's that giving, the individual giving that student veterans can bring that isn't pursued by higher education. They don't look at their veteran alumni and think, dollar signs, like they should, right? Student veterans have the same, if not a better capacity to give. I guess they'd be former student veterans to give to their alma maters. So they've got, not only that same or that guaranteed tuition, but then they've got the giving on the other end as alumni.
As you're both talking, I'm just struck by how uniquely gifted and what specific strengths military students are bringing to the educational institutions and how much stronger that makes those schools. Let's talk about strengths. As we think about this population of students, what are then some of the specific attributes that student vets offer those institutions and then can carry on with them into life? And I'm thinking obviously of leadership and discipline, but those are the basics of this top level. Just really quickly, flatter some of your better instincts and tell us what are some of the strengths that this population offers.
Yeah, well, Abby mentioned some of those earlier. These folks outperform their civilian student counterparts. I mean, and that's not just our opinion saying, "Oh, these are great students." That's statistics. They retain at a higher rate. They persist at a higher rate. They have a higher average GPA. They have higher graduation rates, higher post-graduation employment rates. And they have significantly lower median debt after they graduate. In fact, the average military student, or not the average, the highest level of debt that we see in military students is still lower than the lowest average debt that we see in civilian students who
Now,
are
why
coming
is
out of
that? Is
higher
that
education.
because military students have come to understand the value of, or because they're later in life? What's the data say
Well,
about
a
why
lot of
that
it
is?
has to do with the fact that their tuition is paid by the government, and so they don't have to take out loans, and they're not beholden to paying back these debts. They pay their debts with their time and their sacrifice, and with their health, and with the time that they lose in the civilian world to be young people, to be that college student who's freewheeling and
Yes.
going to keg parties and things like that. They give that up, and that's what they use to pay for their tuition.
Well, and for all those reasons that you enumerated, that's all the more reason for a school to embrace this population, make them successful or set them up for success, but then also put them into leadership positions potentially, or create those opportunities.
Sure.
And create those spaces. Dr. Kinch, this leads great into one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and that's Life Cycle Atlas, project you all are involved with at Student Veterans of America, specifically trying to identify not just who student veterans are, but what's unique about them and sets them apart. So this is a great transition into that. Can you talk about that a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a project that started, started almost a decade ago. But basically, we were trying to figure out sort of the decision points, behavior of folks as they made the transition, from high school to military, from military to college, from college to more college, or onto a career, and sort of where they ended up because of these decisions. And sort of, to the point of debt, I wanted to bring up, um, veterans by and large don't pay their tuition with debt, like Red said, right? Because many have the education benefits that they need. When they do take out debt, it's to support families, right? It's to pay for childcare. It's to, have more bedrooms because they have more family members than are supported by the post 9/11 GI Bill. But it's really, we see higher education is the goal, right? So folks enlist to get those higher education benefits. When they're in military service, many attempt to and are able to use their tuition assistance dollars to pay for some schooling. The many who come out of the Air Force do so with either Community College of the Air Force credits or an associate's degree. And then they move into higher education being, sort of informed by that education. We do see some problems arise with just the lack of information in education that's available to folks in the military, right? When you've got someone who is a first generation college student, I was a first generation college student, when they're on base, they really don't have that family to support those decisions that they're making. And so they may use their TA dollars to work on their education, but they're not doing it in an informed way. So when they get out, they've got all these credits that might not transfer where they want to go. But we're seeing, despite some lacking information, despite the challenges along the way, people who enlist in the military to get an education are getting the education along the way and are earning the degrees post service and are stepping into high paying careers. They're accelerating faster than their civilian counterparts. They're being paid more than their civilian counterparts. And so there are all of these advantages. And what we can do is really just give people the information they need along the way to make better decisions so that they're doing all of that faster, so that they're, compounding the assets that they have to sort of reach their goals sooner so they can, skyrocket and be the leaders that the country needs.
I'd like to flip the script a bit and talk about challenges then that they face. Brad, over at UNC schools, for instance, if we haven't already identified them, what are some of the specific challenges that military students face, and what do y'all do to help them through those?
Yeah, that's great. Great question, and a super important question, and it's another one that Abby sort of touched on earlier. These folks, by and large, are older than their counterparts who are civilians. They, by and large, live off campus. They have jobs more often than their civilian counterparts. They have families, other obligations, and so that boils down to two specific kind of social challenges, right? One is this disconnection from the campus, right? They're not living in the dorms and eating in the caf and going to parties on the quad or whatever sort of events they have, because they have other obligations, right? And so it also boils down to they have less time to spend on anything co-curricular, anything at all, even something as important as joining SVA. I would guarantee you, I would bet half a paycheck that one of the biggest barriers to folks who are veterans joining SVA is that they don't have time to do it because they've got so much other stuff going on. And in higher education, not just within the UNC system, but all over higher education, we cater to the fresh out of high school, first semester freshman, and that college experience, right? And just to give you just a quick example, when I was at one of the universities, it was like pulling teeth to get student veterans to come to any of our events. I mean, we had sailing trips. We went like mountaineering and all of these nobody would come. And so I got fed up with it. And I was like, so I sent out a survey to my students, all my students. I was like, why are you all not coming to these awesome events that I'm putting on for you that you don't have to pay for at all? And overwhelmingly what I got was like, well, Brad, I would love to come camping with you on the weekend, but I've got a 3-year-old. And I'm not going to leave my spouse at home with a 3-year-old so I can go camping with my school buddies. That's not going to fly, right? And so when we think about programming for these students, those are things that we have to consider. We have to consider the fact that these are working professionals. We have to consider the fact that these people have families, and they have to work around that. So if we want to engage them, if we want to get them into that campus culture, we've got to move a little bit. We've got to change the way we do things a little bit, and maybe start designing programming that has family members in mind, and that is off hours, and can really cater to what these students need. Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue into the next topic I wanted to ask Abby about, and that is this idea of what the institutions themselves can do to better help or better serve student veterans and the military students broadly. We've been talking about this, I think, largely from a student lens today, but institutionally, programmatically, what, and this will go to you as well, Brad, but Abby, start us off here. What can schools do better?
Sure. I think there are quite a few things. I did a study back in 20, I don't know, before COVID, that looked exactly at institutional impacts and found that specific policy-wise, having a single point of contact to help student veterans navigate the bureaucracy of higher education is a way to go. Having a veteran-specific orientation, and this is to let student veterans know the services available to them, from veteran-specific to not veteran-specific, including things like accommodations offices, including things like a career center, right? All of the campus offerings, but also offers a place for organic relationships to form, right? Student veterans do so well having a peer network with shared experiences. And so offering that opportunity, having a space on campus for veterans, just like we do for other subsets of student populations. But when we looked at it, we found that there were 5 critical areas where student veterans felt that fixing these things would really help them not just succeed, but also engage in the campus better. And I'll go through them super quickly because I could talk all day about this. But the first one is access to childcare, and that's not like the 9 to 5 childcare. That's the 5 to 9 childcare. Because inevitably, I ended up with some 20-year-old group project leader who wanted to meet on a Tuesday at 8:30, and I was a single parent with 2 kids, and that's bedtime. So it didn't really work out. So helping those folks find childcare after hours. Financing education. We talked about the GI Bill, right? But there are so many other things that student veterans are responsible for financially. Many are caregivers, like I said, their parents, they have spouses. And so not just thinking that veterans are covered, that they don't need access to other financial aid opportunities on campus. Advising. So I may go out on a limb, and this may be a hot take, but TAP does not do an adequate job of advising transitioning veterans as they move into higher education.
Abby, I am shocked.
Oh, I know.
I am shocked. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Absolutely true.
Right. So helping these folks, we see veterans change their majors more often because they go in just, again, 2/3 are first generation college students. So they go in with nothing and they just pick what they think they should major in. And then they end up majoring in those 3 areas that we talked about: business, STEM, and healthcare related fields. And then employment. So 75% of student veterans work full or part-time. And I'm going to tell you some heartbreaking numbers. Women of color, 99% of women of color work full or part-time while in school. 99% of them have to work. And they're working, a majority of student veterans work in food, service, and retail, which are fine. I worked at the college bookstore. It was what it was. But what we should really be doing is leveraging the power of our higher education institutions and their connections with corporate offices, with community offices, with government offices, and putting student veterans who already have work experience in industry roles while they're in school. These can be credentialed roles, non-degreed roles, whatever, but they're putting them where they want to go so that they're getting a network, they're learning the jargon, they're doing what they need to do while also earning a paycheck, right? So they're not having to double down. When we talk about doing internships, we did a survey, and there's one line from a survey that's just chef's kiss, encompasses why student veterans don't do internships. And this person said, I just simply can't afford a summer home. Right? So they've got all this stuff going on, and we expect them to move somewhere for 3 months, give up the job they were doing, not take classes so they're not getting GI Bill, and do this internship. Like, that's insane. And so we see student veterans not getting the opportunities that other students are getting because, again, the system wasn't designed for student veterans. It wasn't designed for non-traditional students, period. And then the last thing, that 5th thing, is a friend, right? Is we all do better. Everybody, all students do better when they have social support in school. And that's what the SVA chapter is. And we preach to our chapters, we work with our chapters on finding ways to be inclusive to all student veterans on their campus, whether that's, the single 25-year-old or the single parent 35-year-old, get them engaged, because having those connections is what really does it for not just the transition, but for success in college.
I want to just dovetail a little bit on what Abby said about what universities can do, or what schools in general can do. But also not just universities, but if there's anybody from VA out there who's listening, can we please get some more salary for our VA work studies? Because $7.25 an hour is not enough to live on. And that is a great way for students who are using VA benefits to make their way through college with a job that caters not only to what they're passionate about, but it can work around their school schedules. And what schools can do too. I know Abby mentioned the fact that things like application fee waivers and priority registration, stuff like that, is not what the most important thing is. And I want to clarify that because I know what you were talking about, Abby. That's the low-hanging fruit. If you're not doing that as an institution, if you are not waiving application fees and offering priority registration to people who are using the GI Bill and waiving application fees for student veterans and active duty service members, you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it right? So everybody needs to do that. Needs to be the baseline. That just needs to be common practice, right? The other thing is military credit articulation, and we can talk about this at a later podcast too. Translating what folks have done in the military in terms of their training and experience into actionable course credit. There's within the UNC system, we just launched. If you want to just look up anybody out there, keyword search UNC system military credit, and it will take you to a page where you can put in all of the information on your joint services transcript and get a readout of what every school within the UNC system will offer you in terms of course credit for your training and experience.
That's a great place to leave it. It would be a great place to leave it. If I didn't want to touch on one last thing that I haven't heard us articulate too much in the last half an hour, and that is mental health, specifically the needs that military students bring in that regard to an institution and an institution's ability to deal with those needs. Brad, why don't you start us off with this?
Yeah, so you're right. There are some very specific things that military students need in terms of mental health. It's one of the biggest challenges. Well, as we talk about those, you got the social challenges, you got the logistical challenges, and you got the wellness challenges, right? And Abby said, we're not just talking about mental health. We're talking about physical health. These folks are coming back with disabilities and needing accessibility resources and services. So partnering our military affiliated services offices, those vet centers, with accessibility resources and services offices, and demystifying that help seeking or process and sort of unpacking that bootstrap mentality of, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, take an 800 milligram GI ibuprofen, keep your socks dry, and drink plenty of water. And that's all you need to do, right? Because that's what that's what these folks are trained to think, and that's what they are ingrained in their mind is this idea, and so it looks to me like a couple of things. We need to get mental health first aid training. This is another thing that we can, if anybody's interested in mental health first aid training, you can look on the UNC System Office Military Affairs website. Mental health first aid training, which is just what it sounds like. It's first aid, but for mental health, not physical health. We're stopping the bleeding and starting the breathing, right? Anybody and everybody who touches a military student in any capacity, school certifying officials, academic advisors, folks who are working in military affairs offices, whoever it is, they need to have that training. So the more people that we can have who are trained in some kind of mental health care, even if it is just first aid, is tremendous, and that is great. The second thing is, our schools have very robust and very, very good counseling centers and mental health facilities, right? But they're just not aware of the specific challenges that military students have. And so some sort of cultural competency training, like Green Zone, for instance, and you'll notice a trend here. You can sign up for Green Zone training for free, anybody and everybody, on the UNC System Military Affairs website. It is just, what's it like in the military 101? What are the specific things about the military that are different than the civilian world? What are some of the unique challenges that these students face as they're coming not only transitioning out of the military, but then transitioning back into another and much different institution of academia. And it gives some really good tools and tips and tricks and best practices for anybody who is working with military affiliated students. So the second thing I would suggest is anybody who is in a college counseling center, get that training, get green zone training. And again, we'll give it to you. You don't have to pay for it. And you even get a nifty little email signature that says that you're green zone certified. So yeah, those would be my two big things. Get mental health first aid to anybody and everybody who works with military students. Get cultural competency training like Green Zone to anybody and everybody who works in college counseling centers.
Well, that's great. That's just great. Before we wrap, Dr. Kinch, anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with everything Brad said. I myself avoided the Disability Services Office for Accommodations until I was in my PhD program and realized, hey, things don't have to be as hard as they are. Yay for me. It only took me, 6 years. So definitely both of those things. I would also add, and my state, I'll call them out. I went to school in Florida. I still live in Florida. Is terrible with this, but also I just looked, and so is North Carolina, is utilization of the VA Vital program. If you don't know what it is, please look at it. It is an incredibly underutilized program that puts a connection to VHA on a college campus so that students are met where they are with what they need in terms of VA services and mental health, in terms of connection to VHA. And that support is so incredible where it's available. The problem is it's just not available. So not in Florida, not in North Carolina. So I challenge you there. But one last thing, I would be remiss if I didn't also just sort of let you all know, Student Veterans of America belongs to a program called the Veteran Wellness Alliance that is sort of hosted at the George W. Bush Institute for Veteran and Military Families. And we've produced this thing called Check-In, right? It's veterancheckin.org, but it connects those with mental health needs, with unmet mental health needs, with, inpatient, outpatient, intensive outpatient services, absolutely free of charge in all 50 states. And so you can refer yourself, refer a friend, refer a buddy at veterancheckin.org. And, it's not a crisis intervention, but it is a connection to care if someone's avoidant of the VA, although the VA does support the program. It's, highly reputable systems. Emory's a part, UCLA, we've got these big groups, WWP is included, their Warrior Care Network. And so it's a great tool to have and to know about. And so just educating our schools, if they can't meet the needs of our students, there are those who can.
Dr. Abby Kinch, Brad Wrenn, thank you so much. Really, thank you for your help understanding the military student and trying to help us get our arms around what that looks like from an institutional perspective. And thank you if you're listening or watching this NC Strive podcast, whether you're a student or an administrator, family member, friend. We hope you found it helpful. To learn more about NC Strive, visit strive.ncgwg.org. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you might like the Governor's Institute's Addiction Medicine podcast. Thanks again for joining us on the NC Strive podcast.